So my name is Joy Richu, and I am an illustrator based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm happy to be on Just for Women Africa.
You describe yourself as a story-driven illustrator and designer. How did your story journey begin in Kenya?
So I started telling stories at quite a young age. I grew up with uh, a mom who ran a children's magazine, and part of the activities of that children's magazine was having storytelling events or visiting schools, or being on radio. And so a lot of my early practice was within that uh, context. And I have since just refined the different ways of telling stories. But first, it started on stage, and then I did a few things on radio. And then I studied creative writing at in Canada. And then, now moving into illustration, I still find ways to bring those narrative threads into the work that I do.
What are some of the challenges you faced in building your brand?
Well, I guess it's a good question, but I often think about challenges more so as opportunities for growth. For example, one of the things that I mentioned before is for a long time, especially on the African continent, there's an emphasis on a title and a big title. And so I think for a long time, one of the challenges that I faced was, some people wondering, am I really doing anything serious? Because I just sit by my computer all day, but people maybe wouldn't understand what I'm doing on my computer all day. Um, and so a lot of that is, I think a big thing is the self and learning to value what you do, even in the day of small things, with every art, with every journey, no matter if it's within the arts, um, there's a day of small things where things don't look as glamorous or as beautiful or incredible as you hope they will, but you just have to keep the faith and keep going no matter what.
Can you walk us through your creative path from hand drawing comics to working on global giants like Coca-Cola and the New York Times?
So I wouldn't call myself a comic artist because the way that comics came in is I was taking a creative writing class. And one of the last, I studied creative writing in my undergrad, and one of the last classes within my program was writing for comics. And so it was that in that class that I was like, oh, I actually really like combining image and text as opposed to what we've been doing the rest of the program, which was mostly just writing. Um, and it was with that comic that I created in that class that I applied for my digital design program in Vancouver Film School. So I wouldn't call myself a comic artist, but comics is definitely what puts the two together, that art and narrative can live harmoniously, and yeah, have been on that path since then.
Which of your go-to tools, like Procreate, Illustrator, or Cinema 4D, do you find most powerful and why?
So the software I find most powerful is actually Photoshop, simply because of the range it gives you in terms of what you can create. The different tools are good for different things. So for example, Illustrator is great for vector files and having very smooth and very clean illustrated pieces, whereas other software such as Procreate gives you a more hand-drawn feeling, but um, it doesn't have the scope and the range and the complexity of a program like Photoshop. And so the reason why I love Photoshop is simply because you have the range of textures, you have the range of shapes, you have line work that you can do. And when you have the additional tools such as a stencil or a drawing pad, it really makes it a seamless creative process. Whereas programs like Cinema 4D are good for 3D modeling, but I find it's very technical. And because not much of my work is 3D, 3D or 4D, um, I therefore mostly rely on programs like Photoshop to create the work that I do.
How do you stay creative, inspired, especially when working on multiple projects for big name clients?
Well, I think the good thing about being on the African continent is how much general inspiration there is. If it's, with regard to the music, if it's regard to even events where people have, poetry or performances of any sort. And so for me, just staying connected to that creative scene really helps me stay inspired, as well as just taking the time to take a breather, because I think sometimes what can lead to a feeling of creative block is feeling very overwhelmed and seeing a lot of pressure to have to deliver a lot in a short period of time. Whereas sometimes if you just take a break and breathe and think through the ideas, it helps the creative juices start flowing again when there's a little less pressure.
You have worked with intentional brands. How do you ensure African's culture is represented authentically?
Well, that's a good question because African culture, first off, is incredibly diverse, and the nuance is it's impossible to understate or overstate. Sorry. So in terms of authenticity, there's a few things that I keep in mind. First off, I ask if it's true for me because I'm African, and therefore, if it's true for me, it is in some way, shape, or form authentically African. If it's authentic for me, and then when it comes to working to explore and express cultures that are different from my own within an African context, I do a lot of research. I speak to people who may be from there. I try to get as much information as possible from as many different sources as possible because sometimes maybe the internet can't give you the little details that you need to really understand a people or a place. Um, and so I speak to people, I listen to the music from the place as well. I look at the clothing from the place. I look at the art that's produced in the place because all these things have been artists who have tried to communicate their culture in one way, shape, or form. And so sometimes even something as simple as listening to a culture's music before you create about that culture can help you unearth certain things about them that you might not just by reading an article, for example.
Tell us more about designing Coca-Cola's first African-inspired drink, Wozzaah. How did you approach that project?
So that was a really interesting project because of first off, it was very collaborative, and it was three companies coming together to work on it. It was an agency called Virtue, which is based in the US, that found me, and then there was a team in the UK from a company called For People, which I worked with the creative leadership there, and then there was a team in South Africa, Coca-Cola, which I worked with on the actual product and brand. And so it was all of these companies coming together to really find out, okay, how do we make this as authentic and as impactful as possible? And so in terms of how it came about, it was a series of meetings. We had about 3 virtual meetings a week. And during those meetings, I'd provide, updates on the work that I've done and the progress we've made given the feedback from previous rounds. And just through consistent working and reiteration, we ended up getting to the final work, which I think was really impactful.
How long did it take you to come up with the Coca-Cola first African-inspired drink, Wozzaah?
So I guess what's interesting is that most people don't maybe know how much time these projects take before they're actually released into the world. And so I was working on the Wozzaah project for about 3 months. But even after it was done, you can't really say anything about it. You can't share any images of what you've done. And so for a long time, you're telling people, "Oh yes, I worked on this really interesting project," but you can't show them anything. And then in January of last year's when there was a launch in South Africa, and that's when it was, we could finally share the work and share all the goodness that has happened. But it takes a long time to get from me drawing to what we end up seeing at the end. But it was a beautiful process.
Which project has been the most creatively fulfilling for you and why?
I think in addition to the different work that I've done with clients, I really enjoy the experimentation process that happens in between. And I think that is the longest project of any creative artist or any um, person who's working in the creative industry is the work that you do in between the big milestones is what really keeps you going. And so what has been the most rewarding for me has been those projects that I've, had an idea of my own and try to figure out, okay, what's the best way to bring this out? And in doing that individual project, a client will therefore later on see something they're like, oh, this person did this in a very interesting way here. And I'd like them to do this for my brand. But yes, it's definitely the in-betweens that are the most fulfilling for me, in addition to the client work as well.
What is it like working with global clients like Mastercard or Porsche?
I guess it's what is beautiful is that you understand that at the heart of it all of these brands are run by people. And when you connect on that basis, I think it makes it a little less overwhelming or, um, you realize that it's just people on a on a human level, connecting and trying to do something together. And so what I'm grateful for is just the fact of the internet, and the fact that because of the way that the internet is, it's possible for us to work with people from all over the world without much of a hiccup. Like right now, I'm speaking to you from Ghana, which wouldn't be possible if the internet wasn't there. So any behind the scenes stories is just that, is that, the more people and brands you work with, the more you realize that at the heart of it, it's at the core, it's just people working together. It doesn't matter what the brand is or how big the project is. It's just people working together, which I think has been insightful for me to learn.
Do you have a dream collaboration you are still hoping to make happen?
Well, I have very many dream collaborations. I want to work with a lot of brands, not just because of the prestige of it, even though that's good. Is that I understand how much work it takes to build a global brand. It takes so much work to build not only a global brand, but a global and successful brand. And what I value about these partnerships with brands, like I'd love to work with Nike, for example. I'd like to work with Pringles, even, for example, is that in working with these teams, you get to understand something of the company that becomes valuable for you as a creative, just in terms of how they do things, in terms of how they think through things, in terms of their values. Um, Nike has been on my list for a long time, but yeah, I just want to do good work for as many different people as possible.
What advice would you give to African illustrators trying to break into the global design space?
Well, I tell you to just keep on working. For a long time, the what I was doing wasn't glamorous or wasn't interesting to most people, simply because I think within the continent there's this idea that in order to be doing something interesting, you have to have a very big title or a very big name, or to work in this very big company with a big title. And so for a long time, it wasn't something that was aspirational, the work that I do. But I think what I've learned and what I would advise someone is that you're much better off being an incredible illustrator or an incredible musician than being a mediocre creative director, for example. But if you're going to be a creative director, be the best creative director you can be, or be the best role you can be, as opposed to just chasing things for the title of it. Um, so yeah, I definitely say if illustration is what you're passionate about, do it wholeheartedly. Try to be the best in your industry. Try to be the best in your geographic location. And all the things that come with the prestige of big titles comes when you're really good at what you do, regardless of the title.
What legacy do you hope to leave in the creative world?
Well, for me, a big part of what I hope my legacy is tied to my identity. One of the things that I learned from spending 7 years living in Canada, where I was studying, was just how important it was for the world to know that Africa is an incredible continent with people who have incredible talent and who are incredibly smart. And at the time when I was studying, that wasn't, it wasn't what people thought when they think about the African continent. And so a lot of work was done even then to be like, no, Africa is a great continent. First of all, there's so many different countries, there's so many different cultures, there's so much innovation and beauty in this continent. And so I'd love to have a legacy that not only ties my work, but shows the value of where I'm from in the work that I ended up doing in the end. And that's what I hope part of my legacy is.
Where do you see yourself and your brand in the next 5 years?
Well, 5 to 10 years is a big period of time. Maybe in the next 5 years, I definitely see myself expanding more into maybe the business side of things. As I mentioned before, I come from a pretty business focused family. And so over the years, I've also learned a lot about the business world. And I think I'd really like to lean into that and explore what a business could look like within the next 5 years. Within the next 10 years, it would be to grow what I've built in the 5 years that are coming. But yeah, that's what I plan for the next 5 years.